On today's show, the Hawks go to Chicago, pick up a play-in preview victory over the Bulls. We'll get into all of what transpired, how it impacts the play-in race, the return of Jalen Johnson, and much more, and all of that is coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1685 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Monday evening into Tuesday here in early April. And today's show is brought to you by the folks at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Also, I should encourage you, as I always do at the top of the podcast, to make us your first listen each and every day. Check us out and subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcasts. Of course, that includes places like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. We're also on YouTube on the video side. And today's show will heavily focus on what became a good win for the Hawks on the road, 113-101 over the Bulls. And a kind of a play-in preview of sorts. And in fact, it's incredibly likely to be a preview of the 9 versus 10 matchup coming up in about 2 weeks, either in Chicago or in Atlanta, depending on what's going to happen there. About a 99% chance of that. So I'm banking on that as a very likely outcome. And this time around, the Hawks got a pretty solid kind of, not wire to wire, but close to it kind of victory. Also the return of Jalen Johnson and Bufkin in this game. A little bit of reinforcements of young, talented players for the Hawks. Always a positive thing. Atlanta was down, ironically, 11-0 to begin the game. But from that point forward, they were decisively the better team, and that ended up being a pretty comfortable 12-point victory. With this win, by the way, the Hawks are now only a half game behind the Bulls for the 9 seed in the East. Only 7 games left for the Hawks, 6 games left for the Bulls. Notably, the Bulls do have a tiebreaker head-to-head because they beat the Hawks twice this year, as to only once for the Hawks. So Atlanta's still a slight underdog, I would say, for the 9 seed, but it's essentially they pretty much had to, or was close to had to, win this game to have a functional chance to get the 9 seed, and they did. So there you go. Now, I'm not sure they're favored, but there's certainly much more in the mix than they would have been had they lost this one, and we'll sort of go back to debating on how much that actually matters at the end of this podcast. So all that said, we'll kind of dive in now. If you're a new listener, what we're going to do here is kind of go big picture at the beginning of the podcast, talk about how this game unfolded, some of the returns, also the player-by-player evaluations later in the show, as well as kind of how the game flowed, etc., etc. Pre-game, probably the biggest note was that Jalen Johnson and Kobe Bufkin came back, as I mentioned before. Johnson returns after missing the last 6 games before this, also 9 of the previous 12 games with the sprained ankle. The Hawks kind of foreshadowed this a little bit. He was listed as questionable on Saturday. Didn't play, but I speculated on that show that he was probably going to play on Monday. That ended up being the case. Bufkin comes back after a 14-game absence with a toe injury. So the Hawks have been basically playing, they've had 10 guys available almost every game for quite some time now. That went up to 12 in this game, which is very helpful. Actually, 13 technically with Seth Lundy coming back from the G League. So they were much healthier than they've been in recent days. Still a lot of injuries. Trae Young, Onyeka Okongwu, Saddiq Bey, etc., but much, much more like a functional roster coming up here for the Hawks. And generally speaking, Chicago was, by the way, on a back-to-back with travel, so that was a situational advantage for Atlanta in this game, even with the game happening in Chicago. But the Hawks were 2-point underdogs in this game, according to our friends at FanDuel. Part of that was because of the back-to-back for Chicago, but part of that, though, is that there's not a huge perceived gap between the Bulls, even at semi-full strength. They're also missing Zach LaVine, Patrick Williams, etc., and where the Hawks are, even without Trae, especially because they got Jalen back in this game. That was certainly notable through that lens. So, also, just quickly here, before we get into the stuff from this game, a shout out to DeJounte Murray, who won the Eastern Conference Player of the Week award for last week. Obviously, he was fantastic a week ago when he averaged about 28 and 10 for the Hawks and leading them to a 3-1 record. And those 2 memorable wins, of course, against Boston, including the game winner in one of those games. So, no surprise that he won it, but certainly he earned it. And shout out to DeJounte for that honor. Back to the game itself. I know this is an area that gets a lot of focus sometimes, and that's because it often can swing basketball games at any level. It happens in college, it happens in the WNBA, it happens in women's college basketball, it happens in the NBA, and in this game, the 3-point line kind of decided things in some respects. In fact, it was pretty clearly the single biggest factor in the game by a pretty wide margin. The Hawks were 19 of 40 from 3 in the game, which is excellent on its own. 19 makes a ton. 48% or so from 3-point range is obviously fantastic. And that included 1 of 8 for Atlanta in the fourth quarter. So going into the fourth quarter, they were actually 18 of 32, which is remarkably good. We'll come back to it, but Vik Krejci had a career night from three. He was 6 for 6 from three for a career high in three-pointers made and also a career high in points. So that kind of tells the story in some respects. On the other side, the Bulls were 7 of 28 from three. And that is with them actually making 3 threes in the fourth quarter when the Hawks only made 1. So all in all, the Hawks outscored the Bulls by 36 points on threes. And that was pretty clearly the difference in the game in some respects. Now, before anybody gets too mad at me, part of that is baked into these two teams. It's not always, nuance is important here. It's not just in a vacuum. The Bulls allow the most three-point attempts in the entire league defensively. Their scheme is aggressive, but they do allow a lot of threes. And if you make them at a high level, like the Hawks did in this game, you're probably going to win. That's kind of baked into how they operate. On the other side of things, Chicago is below average. They're not horrible, but they're below average in three-point volume and three-point accuracy on offense. So it is not shocking at all that the Hawks would outshoot the Bulls from three. It was the size of the disparity that kind of drove the result in this game. It was more pronounced in the first half than the second half, but the Hawks quite literally lost every other stat category that usually matters. All the 4 factors, they were out-rebounded in this game. They lost turnover battle in this game. They lost 2-point shooting in this game. They lost free throw line in this game. All of that stuff went to Chicago, head to head. Every single one of those things was advantage Chicago. But if you make 12 more threes than your opponent in an NBA game, your win probability is like 90% or higher with nothing else factored in at all. Just that stat. If that's all you knew in this game was the Hawks were going to make 19 threes and the Bulls were going to make 7, the Hawks become a massive favorite. And of course, they won the game as a result. So we'll kind of zoom back out now. That was certainly for me the biggest thing in this game was the shooting. And even with context, it was favorable for Atlanta. Overall on offense, it was solid for the Hawks in this game. It wasn't incredible. They were a little bit quiet in the fourth quarter, but still ended up with about a 117, 118 offensive rating. That is essentially identical to what the Hawks averaged for the season, so that's rock solid. Not incredible, but certainly very solid. I mentioned earlier, but obviously three-point shooting was the biggest key there. It was actually shocking that they did not set a new season high from three. Their high for a game is 23s. They had 18 threes through 3 quarters and then went cold and took fewer in the fourth quarter, only have 19, but still 19 to 40 is awesome. The other awesome thing for the Hawks in this game was their ball movement, I would say. They had 29 assists. Part of that is the ball going in the basket, of course, at a high level, but the ball was pinging around. There was not a whole lot of being bogged down in this game. It was not as stodgy as it's been at times in recent days. They had strong balance, not one guy or 2 guys or 3 guys taking shots. It was basically a community effort from the Hawks in this game. 8 guys had 8 points or more. Essentially everyone other than DeAndre Hunter shot it well from 3 in this game. In fact, Hunter was 2 of 10 from 3. Everybody else was 17 of 30, which is like 55%. So that kind of explains that. As mentioned before, they didn't do a whole lot else well on offense. They were below average on the glass. Only 18 free throw attempts. They actually were 12 of 18 from the line. That's actually pretty bad. They had 20 points on turnovers for Chicago. None of that's great, but it didn't matter because they shot the heck out of the ball. Basically, they shot Chicago out of the gym in this one. Defensively, they did their job and more, I will say. Now, they did allow 31 points to DeMar DeRozan, and DeRozan weirdly has kind of dominated the Hawks. In fact, he has now scored at least 20 points in 16 straight games against the Hawks. That is the longest streak against the Hawks of any player in the league. So he gets what he gets against the Hawks. But everything else was pretty smooth sailing for Atlanta in this game. Again, it helped that the Bulls were 7 of 28 from 3, but Chicago only had 17 assists. That's usually a good sign for your defense. They did end up winning the possession battle by 15 shooting possessions. So if you're a regular listener, you will know that I often note this. You want to win on the margins in the NBA. For as much as I led with three-point shooting in this game, you can't bank on that. So fundamentally, you want to take more shots from the field or from the free throw line than your opponent, which means winning the rebounding battle and winning the turnover battle because you want to just get the shots to the rim and then let the variance kind of work its magic. Because the best way to avoid shooting variance losses in particular is to take more shots than your opponent. It's not always foolproof. The Bulls are proof of that in this game because they really did dominate on the margins. Is that the Hawks just shot the heck out of the ball in this game. So I will say, wrapping this whole thing up, the Hawks did a good job all night long contesting shots and also taking advantage of Chicago's weaknesses. Because if I was coaching against the Bulls, I would want the Bulls to take not necessarily open shots, but you want to have the Bulls, take some contested shots because they're not a great shooting team. DeMar is a great mid-range shooter, but he's 0-3 from 3 in this game. I am a little bit afraid of Kobe White, but he was only 2 of 7 in this game. But, Ayo Dosunmu, Torrey Craig, Javon Carter is a fine shooter, but nothing great. Vucevic is 1 of 2 in this game. All this. They have basically no one in their lineup tonight is a knockdown shooter. So if you're the Hawks, you know that. You can game plan for it, be a little bit more aggressive, and the Bulls did not burn them, and that was part of why this game ended the way that it did. So on the whole, the Hawks played very well in this game. The Bulls are not a juggernaut by any means, but to go on the road, even with a rest advantage, and essentially lead by double digits for the middle part of the game on, it's very solid. That's a very good win for the Hawks. It's not going to, change your life in the way those Boston wins did as far as perception is concerned and fan excitement and all that. But again, this is going to be almost certainly a preview of the 9-10 game. And that does not mean the Hawks are definitely going to win it. It's 1 game out of 82, but it obviously gives them some confidence. Like, if the Hawks might have to go to Chicago in about 12, 14, 15 days from now to play a play-in game, and it'll be win or go home. And they will now have knowledge that they just went there 2 weeks before and won convincingly. That you can sort of debate on how much that matters, but the Hawks now have that in their minds. They know they can win there. We'll see about Trey coming back. We'll see about Onyeka coming back. But for now, we already knew this, but just functionally, we already knew the Hawks could win in Chicago. It's practically speaking, the Bulls are not like some juggernaut team, but they did it tonight. They played well doing it, and always nice to have a nice road win on the ledger to begin a new month, because it's April 1st, and all things sort of pressing on toward the playoffs, the play-in, etc., etc. All right, we'll have more of this game coming up, but first, a word from our friends at BetterHelp. Sometimes you just need to get something off your chest. That's just the reality of the situation. Whether it's big or small, certain things can actually start to get to you if you let them. Let that stuff out, though. It's important to do that, especially someone who happens to be unbiased on your life. And today I want to tell you about something that maybe for a few of you doesn't really matter, but maybe for some of you might understand. I get that. And that's that I have some unease about the media situation right now in the world. And I'm not talking about the Hawk stuff, about reporting all that stuff, but whether there's actually going to be jobs for people like me that are doing media things, covering basketball, covering sports, etc., and whether that's going to continue in the future. Of course, not the most intense thing or life-altering topic in the world, but therapy can be different for everybody. Most of us, including me, have bigger situations to fry than this one. I will certainly grant that, but it is quite important to get something off of your chest if you need to every once in a while. And if you think about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try right now. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule as well. And the place to go is betterhelp.com/lockedonnba. You get 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. That's betterhelp.com/lockedonnba. One more time. The place to go is betterhelp.com/lockedonnba. All right, we'll dive into the game flow in this one. And Jalen Johnson came off the bench. No surprise there. He was limited minutes. We don't have a full-on, direct number of minutes that he was limited to, but Jalen played about 25. That's probably around where he was limited. I'd love to reveal that information, but coming off the bench is a good giveaway that he was not 100% as far as the minutes restriction is concerned. And the Hawks had a pretty ugly start in this game. In fact, it was 11-0 Bulls after 3 minutes. The Hawks missed their first 3 shots. That does happen every once in a while. Then they had 3 consecutive live ball turnovers, and that will get you beat. So in a blink of an eye, they're down 11-0, and from that point forward, they were obviously in good shape. We didn't know that at the time, so there you go. To their credit, it was an 11-2 run right after that to get back within 2. Capella had 6 points in a row. He's very good in this game. Rotationally, it was interesting in some ways. So Garrison Matthews, first off the bench, as he has been for a while. He and Vit Krejci combined to go back-to-back threes mid-quarter. That was nice. And Jalen Johnson came in about the 5-minute mark or so alongside Bruno Fernando. He actually had 2 threes in a row himself, had a nice drive for a layup starting off in the first quarter. Then it was Kobe Bufkin as the backup point guard in this game. I didn't think it was a lock that it was going to be Kobe. Now, I understand that, and I made fun of this with Glenn Willis, my friend of ATL 29 fame, a regular guest of this podcast. We joked about this on Twitter. I was prepared for the Hawks fan freak out if Trent Forrest was playing over Bufkin tonight because he had been out for so long, but I'm glad that didn't happen. Trent was not very good the last couple games, which probably helped matters a little bit. But Kobe played well, looked like himself, which is good to see after a long layoff. And the Hawks had another big run at the end of the quarter. So in the middle of the quarter, 11-2. At the end of the quarter, 12-4 to go by a 2-point margin. A nice recovery. And again, they made 6 threes in that first quarter. The bench unit, which basically was bench plus bogey in the first half, worked out very well. And then from that point forward, after the first quarter, I should say, the starters played much better as the game went along. Bogey had a ridiculous step back 3 early in the quarter over Caruso in the second quarter. They were, Bogey was cooking in this game. Everybody was basically. I kind of like that they at least tried Kobe with DeJounte for a handful of minutes, not a ton, but probably 3 or 4 minutes in the first half. It got a little bit tight again, but they closed with more shot making. Veet was hunting shots in a way that he does not always do. In fact, this is the most aggressive I've ever seen Veet as a shooter. Of course, it helps when you make them all, but he was looking for a shot, which I'm encouraged by as a Veet believer. The Hawks are actually up by 18 points. I mentioned it before, but it was even more stark in the first half than the second half about just how much it was traced to the shooting. The Hawks were 14 of 26 in the first half from three, and they lost every other margin, but they were already up by a 36-point margin from three. So that was the end margin from three in the game. So in the second half, the Bulls made as many threes as the Hawks did. In the first half, the Hawks made 12 more threes than the Bulls. And that was basically it. Like the Hawks were only up, they were up 8, and they ended up winning the second half by 4 points. So the second half was much closer than the first half because the shooting kind of normalized, but even then, it was enough. The Hawks were actually up early in the third to go actually double digits. It was a 7-0 run. Veet hit another three. He was red hot. And by the middle of the third quarter, it was a 16-point margin. The Bulls were missing all of their shots, which was certainly helpful from 2-point and 3-point range. It's pretty steady overall in the third quarter from the Hawks. They made 4 more threes. They were up 16 points. Bogey hit one from what the NBA said was 36 feet in the third quarter. Everything went well there. And look, I feel bad because like I could give you lots of my like little tiny notes, but most of the fourth quarter was pretty ho-hum. Now, they went to Wes Matthews early in the fourth, which was a little bit weird. Not in a terrible way, but like normally when a guy does not play for the first 3 quarters, he doesn't play at all, or he plays only in garbage time. And Wes did neither of those things. He came in and played like regular minutes. And usually an old guy in particular like Wes is, no offense to Wes, who's like my age, just a little bit odd. I think they're probably maybe trying to spell Jalen a little bit or whatever, but he looked fine when he played, but there you go. Also, I found it amusing. The Bulls, to the point earlier about their lack of three-point shooting, this is a standard of mine. Most teams, I would say the vast majority of teams, when they're down double digits in the fourth quarter and they have to try to make a comeback, they tend to go small and they tend to go with more shooting. Quinn definitely does this. Nate used to do it too. The Hawks go small and they go offense mostly when they're down big. And that makes sense. You want to increase variance and you're probably going to lose anyway, but you want to go down swinging. The Bulls did the opposite. The Bulls went to a lineup with Drummond and Vucevic. They're 2 centers together, which didn't work, but I thought it was just really interesting that they did that in that moment. Anyway, there was a weird challenge mid-quarter in the fourth quarter when Jalen had a potential three-point play. It was challenged by Chicago as a block charge call. The Bulls technically won the challenge, but it was only overturned to a no call, which I thought was really kind of odd. It didn't have a huge impact, just kind of a notable weirdness. The Hawks lead, how about this first stat? The reason why the fourth quarter was not so intense for notes purposes was the Hawks led by between 11 points and 16 points for the first 10 minutes of the fourth quarter. So it was basically back and forth, but in a very tight range, and the Hawks were in control. They weren't like blowing the doors off the Bulls. The Bulls were hanging around, but there was no run, if that makes sense. Like the Bulls just never had the run that they had to make, and the Hawks did a good job kind of staving that off. But it was kind of just like a holding serve kind of quarter. Finally, we got to 17 with 2 minutes to go. There was an odd moment that we have to talk about a little bit now, where it was actually captured on camera by the Bulls broadcast of Bogey and Quinn getting into it in a way that was very strange for the Hawks being in total control of the game. Like the Hawks were up by double digits. The game was mostly over. Bogey was coming out of the game at that point. The starters were coming out. And Bogey got really mad. And I don't know why. You know, obviously he's a fiery competitor. But he was more animated than you would normally see Bogey. So that's all we know. We couldn't hear that on the broadcast. It was just visual. Bogey kind of threw a water bottle down, etc. In the post game, Quinn was not asked directly about it, but he did sneak in some positive stuff about Bogey in a different answer to a question from Lauren Williams of the AJC. He said, and I'm quoting here, "Bogey was terrific, and he and I are in a great place. Better than good. Great." End quote. So Quinn, I'm sure, knew that got on the broadcast and want to cover up a little bit. I'll be the first to say, I don't think this is anything, to be honest with you. I think Bogey is a competitive guy. I think he and Quinn get along fine. Bogey's playing really well right now, which I'm sure makes it a little bit weirder that it happened, but I don't worry at all, honestly. And I would tell you if I did, or that I thought it was something else. It was weird. It was definitely weird, given how the Hawks were up so much. If they've been losing, like this stuff happens. Like I'll be the first to say is, even if the Hawks were losing, I would be saying, look, in the NBA, tensions run high sometimes, win or lose, coaches, players, etc. Stuff happens in the locker room, out of the locker room. Like guys have little, shouting matches or whatever. So I don't worry about that really at all. The only reason why I'm even talking about this as much as I am now is because they were winning by so much. It was kind of odd, but anyway, I think that will probably be the last time I ever reference it on the podcast. But that happened at the end of the game. Other than that, though, there were no fireworks. The Hawks were just in control the entire fourth quarter. They lost the quarter, but the Bulls got within I think 8 or 10 at the very, very end of the game, but it was mostly over at that point. There wasn't like full-blown garbage time, so we never got to see Trent Forrest or Steph Lundy in this game, who were active. By the way, Dylan Windler was not active, which is probably smart because they didn't need him in this game. But anyway, on the whole, I said it once before, I'll say it again now, just a rock-solid road win. And the Hawks are 15-22 on the road this year. Like, nothing's ever assured there on the road against anyone, especially the Bulls are not terribly good, but they're not bad. Like, they're a 500-ish basketball team who are professional. So, yeah, a nice win for the Hawks, and we'll get into how this game unfolded when it comes to the player evaluations, which is always a fun part of the podcast, talking about all 10 guys who appeared for the Hawks in this game. But first, a word from our friends at Game Time. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier for you. They have killer last minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and also their lowest price guarantee. And they are a fantastic option. Game Time is to make things easy for you. I've been a regular user of the Game Time app for quite some time now. It's come in handy a ton for me, looking for tickets for the Braves and Falcons, or when I'm on the road, etc. And you can save 60% off when buying last minute tickets at Game Time for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and much more. They have flash deals. You can actually save even more with exclusive in-app deals and select seats before the game or the event happens to start. And also save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats for you. They also have an awesome feature. You can toggle between to show the total up front with no surprise fees when you get to that checkout at the very end. Also get a panoramic view of where the seat is in the venue in the app before you buy the tickets, and you are getting the lowest price guaranteed, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference from somewhere else. Your purchase is covered by the most flexible customer service policy in the industry, including event cancellation, protection, and on-time ticket delivery. Take all of the guesswork out of buying tickets with the Game Time app. Download the Game Time app right now, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that promo code. Spell out it's Locked On NBA. It's Locked On NBA. That's the promo code for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Okay, and before I dive into the actual players who appeared in this game, some injury updates that were released from the Hawks officially on Monday on 3 guys. So most notably, Onyeka Okongwu. So he's been out for the last 13 games or so he missed 13 games from mid-February to mid-March. Then he came back for 2 games. The Hawks limited him in those games. Then they listed him kind of strangely, as I talked about on the podcast then, as being out for injury management for a game. I asked Quinn about that. He gave me a frustrated no answer. Then Okongwu's not missed the last 6 games in a row. So that was a little bit strange. There's been no update on him until today. The Hawks said that he's had a period of unloading, which basically means he's staying off the toe. And then now he's returned to individual work at this point, but he'll be reevaluated again in 7 to 10 days. Now, the Hawks love to do the reevaluation in 7 to 10 days thing as they're listed. So that's a little bit vague on purpose. But notably here, keep this in mind for all these guys, the regular season finale, as I'm recording this podcast, is 13 days from now. So 12 days as you listen to the podcast on Tuesday. So a reevaluation in 7 to 10 days, this is always the case, but functionally, it is not a guarantee that Okongwu plays again this year. Now, I'm not saying he won't, but if you follow the timeline, if the last game of the year is 13 days from now, and he may not be really reevaluated for 10 more days, it is not a lock he plays again. So keep that in mind. He's going to be out for at least another week, and we'll see. And he's, of course, the most prominent guy other than Trey. Trey's the most prominent guy, but there's been no update there since the last time. TBD on that. And for everybody asking me if I knew, I would tell you, I don't know. AJ Griffin also was updated today. He played in 6 games in the G League, of course. Then he went down in early March 5th, with a high ankle sprain. And he's doing individual work as well. Another reevaluation in 7 to 10 days. I think if AJ came back, he probably wouldn't play anyway, so he might just be done, but we'll see. Mohamed Gay, also in the same realm. He's not played in an NBA game since October. Of course, he had the long-term back injury. He did play in 4 games in the G League in March, but then he's not played again since March 12th, so about 3 weeks since then. Following that, he has the UCL sprain in his elbow of his right / shooting arm, so there's something there. He's doing full contact workouts right now, which is a step ahead of where AJ and Onyeka are, but no timetable given for Mo Gay. Similarly to AJ, I could be wrong, I don't think that the Hawks are going to be super eager to play Mohamed Gay in an NBA game right now, but maybe he will. We'll see. And by the way, College Park season is over, so there's nowhere to have him kind of go rehab. So there is a chance, I'll say this now before the end of the podcast, because of how locked in the Hawks and Bulls are. They're not actually locked in, but they're 99% to face each other in the 9-10 matchup. Let's say, for example, the Hawks have a game or two at the end of the year where they don't have anything to play for. That might be a chance to see a guy like Logue play. But until then, I think the Hawks are going to obviously, they're trying to win every night. I've been saying this all season long, especially in the last couple months. Quinn Snyder is trying to win every game. He's playing guys lots of minutes. They are not fooling around. So, like, development minutes are not really happening right now. The closest thing to development minutes would be playing Bufkin right now, but even then, he's probably just better than Forrest. So there's that. Anyway, full steam ahead until otherwise noted. But that's the update on those three guys. And again, Trey, TBD. As for this game, 10 guys appeared in this one. 9 of them played double-digit minutes. Wes Matthews did not. He played 8 minutes only in the fourth quarter. He looked fine, but kind of incomplete in some ways there. Bufkin returns. I thought he looked pretty good, especially defensively. Had a couple of nice, quick hands plays that he's want to do. Had a block shot. Only 1 turnover. Had actually hit a 3. Not super aggressive offensively, but did have 3 assists, 2 rebounds. Looked the part. Like, obviously, he's not played basketball in a while, but I thought he looked pretty good as a backup point guard, and that's an encouraging sign. Garrett Matthews hit 3 threes in 17 minutes, 9 points, had an assist, had a rebound, drew a charge. A very typical Garrison game. Only threes, drew a charge, and just solid off the bench. Bruno Fernando, 22 minutes, 10 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. He had one really good stint in the second half, I thought, where he was kind of taking it to Drummond and Vucevic. That was good to see from Bruno. A very, very solid effort from him across the board. And then Jalen Johnson, 11 points, 4 rebounds, 2 steals, and an assist. He actually did shoot 1 of his last 9 from the field after making his first 3 shots, but I thought he looked fine physically, which is all that matters. I think Jalen, obviously, the sky's the limit for him in the future. Even this year, you could argue he's been their second or third best player at times this year. So, yeah, he's been really, really good, and nice to have him back. That's a huge X factor. As for when he'll start, I got a question about that. I don't know the answer to that. I'm sure as soon as he is able to play 30-plus minutes, he'll be starting, but I don't really care that much about that, so we'll see. TBD on how much he can play in the near future. To the starters, Vit Krejci had a career night. 25 minutes is not a career night, but 18 points. That's a career high for Vit. 6 of 6 from 3 is a career high in makes, of course. 3 assists, 4 rebounds. Vit looks great. We'll have more on him later this week. Actually, I have a question to answer on Vit from the mailbag kind of thing. But he's looking really good right now, playing very well, facilitating, making quick decisions. I love that he was hunting a shot in this game. Obviously, he's not going to make all the threes every game, but obviously, I thought it was good that he was at least aggressive in taking those shots. Capella looks good, man. I know that I'm the Capella guy, but he has been playing extremely well for like 6 weeks now. I mean, maybe not 6 weeks, maybe 4 or 5 weeks, but still. 15 points, 11 rebounds, a steal, 2 blocks in 26 minutes, 6-9 from the floor, like efficient, good defensively, impactful on the boards, all that stuff. He's playing really well right now. That's all I have for now. Hunter kind of had the shakiest night of all the key guys. 8 points on 12 shots, 2 from 3. That's going to happen. Most of the shots were open, by the way. Just had a bad shooting night. That's going to happen every once in a while. 4-6, 6 rebounds. I thought he played fine. Defensively, DeRozan had his way with DeAndre a few times, but other than that, I thought he was just fine. Bogey, pre the blow up at the end of the game, was really good. 20 points, 6 assists, 4 rebounds. Only took 7 shots. It was actually a little bit interesting to me. Bogey was the only guy that it felt like Chicago was really loading to defensively. Like, it was almost like the Bulls said, everyone else is allowed to shoot except Bogey. And that's how you have Bogey take 7 shots in the game. But he made 6 of them, including 2 threes, got to the line 6 times, played really well. Like, he's playing extremely well. And look, I'm not trying to do this every podcast, but I do not understand why Bogey is not seen as a top 3 or 4 or 6 man of the year candidate. I'm not saying he has to win, but I look at the betting odds at FanDuel and other places. Like, I don't understand why he's not up at the top of the list. It breaks my brain. I don't get it. He is eligible. I know he's starting right now, but he's going to be nowhere near having too many starts. So get the word out there. Bogey should be a candidate for 6 man of the year. There you go. And then DeJounte. A much quieter night from DeJounte than it has been recently, which is not a bad thing. I thought he played fine. 17 points, 8 rebounds, 6 assists. Did have 5 turnovers. Actually had kind of a slow start in this one, but after that was really good. And rock solid again. Eastern Conference Player of the Week. I think he has a decent chance to win Player of the Month for March. I'm not sure if he's going to win it or not. I know my friend Kevin Chenard wrote about that at Hawks.com earlier, either yesterday or today. So read that from Kevin. But yeah, he might win that one too, but certainly already won Player of the Week. Playing very well. and he's been carrying a huge workload. It was encouraging the Hawks only had to play Murray 33 minutes, Bogey 34 minutes. They've actually had to play those guys a ton recently, so not a night off or anything, but certainly not quite the pedal to the floor like it has been recently in what was a comfortable win for Atlanta. Okay, from here, the Hawks play again on Wednesday. They have 7 games remaining in the season. Of course, the Hawks are 35-40, so if they were to win out, they'd be above 500. Now, that's not likely to happen, but it's possible at this point. They only have 2 games I would say are extremely favorable on paper, and as always, on paper does not mean in reality, because on the other side, the Hawks had 2 games against Boston they were supposed to lose by double digits on paper, and they won them. So it goes the other way too. But the Hawks play a very favorable game on Wednesday at home against Detroit. Detroit is not good. They lost tonight at home to the Grizzlies. They have the worst record in the league this year. They are 13-62. So that doesn't guarantee anything, but that's a game that the Hawks will be favored in comfortably, even if they have injury issues as they have for a while. So we'll see how they respond to that one. And then they actually have a back-to-back from there. They have to travel to Dallas quickly. That's a rescheduled game, PSA. That was supposed to be a game on Friday. Now it's on Thursday. So just follow that along. That'll be, actually was a TNT game. It's not anymore. But Wednesday this week, Wednesday at home, then at Dallas on Thursday, and then at Denver on Saturday during the Final Four. And I will actually be at the Final Four, which will be a little bit of a challenge. I'll be the one person in the building in Glendale, Arizona, watching Hawks Nuggets, and because I'm that kind of sicko. But anyway, stay tuned for that. Please subscribe to the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, places like Apple and Spotify, as well as YouTube. And please, rate, review, share, like, all of that fun stuff to get the word out. Please follow the show on Twitter/X at Locked On Hawks. I'm also there at BT Rowland. I write about the Hawks, also share some audio sometimes, etc. at patreon.com/BT Rowland. If you want a little bit of extra Hawks coverage, I am there in that space. And I do appreciate everybody listening. Please tell a friend about the podcast as always. Enjoy the start to your April. We are now officially in April as I'm talking to you, but I'll have more coming up later on. I'm planning to do a in-between game podcast either tomorrow or Thursday, or Friday. There'll be one non-game podcast this week. I'm not sure which day, but stay tuned for that. Subscribe to the show, and we'll see you all next time.